Rachel Rebouche. I am a professor of law at Temple University in Philadelphia. I'm the Associate Dean for Research at Temple, and I'm at Leeds working with the Center for Social Policy and collaborating with Stu Marvel and Martha Feynman on their vulnerability work and looking at vulnerability theory as it relates to a book I'm writing on reproductive justice. I graduated with a BA and I wanted to do social work, and I moved to Chicago to work for a nonprofit, and discovered while in Chicago a fellowship that would put me at Queen's University to do an LLM in international law. And I applied, and I got it, and I went, and I ended up living in Belfast for almost 5 years. And during that time, was involved in a research project based out of Queens as a researcher that was a comparative research project where we were interviewing legal professionals. I hadn't gone to law school yet, judges and lawyers, about changes in their human rights laws and in their constitutions. And so it really sparked my interest in law and in social justice and the intersection of social justice and legal work. Because I had also worked for the Human Rights Commission in Northern Ireland, working on a Bill of Rights for the region. So I went to law school after that and graduated with a JD. And after I graduated, I became a women's rights lawyer. I worked in DC for a nonprofit before I started teaching. So my research interests are really formed by those experiences. I hope that the work I do in reproductive justice is both theoretical, I mean, definitely drawing from Martha's work, which has been vitally important to family law scholars, which I am one, to health law scholars. I also work in that field, but also practical. Has something to say about activism, about the way in which movements work for and think about change. So I guess my research areas, that part of the question, family law, health law, reproductive health law, social movements, and comparative law. This year I've been on leave, and in the spring I visited at HLS at Harvard Law School, and this fall I'm at the University of Cape Town at their law school. And what is really driving my research and my thinking about reproductive justice at the moment is the role of customary law and the role of community engagement with questions of procreation. And so South Africa, where I've been based, is one of the places that I've researched because at the end of apartheid, shortly after, a couple of years after, the parliament passed a law permitting abortion, a fairly liberal law on abortion, and wrote into the Constitution a right to reproductive health and a right to reproductive decision making. And it really is, that's really something. Most constitutions don't refer to reproductive rights. And that activism was on the back of a very powerful feminist movement to have constitutions recognize women's reproductive decision-making and health. But there's a problem. People can't access reproductive health services in South Africa. The infrastructure has not changed with the Constitution or with legislation, and there's nothing necessarily that new or shocking about a gap between law and practice. But I'm really relying on resilience thinking and vulnerability theory to ask the questions of how institutions respond to that need in light of these legislative constitutional changes, and where are individuals finding the resources they need. And so to come back to where I started, custom and community medical professionals, community healers. That's one source of healthcare provision that is often overlooked by people who work in rights. So I share, for instance, Martha's skepticism of rights as the solution, the end game. And I think looking at the way in which people actually engage questions and decisions around reproduction, not just as autonomous people who are deciding, but as members of families and communities and people who are interacting with institutions, what is their lived reality in a moment like South Africa, where you have a legal framework that's permissive, but not necessarily a health infrastructure that is providing people what they need. So I really think this is where resilience comes into play, and thinking about vulnerability as a inevitable condition, that we are all vulnerable in our communities, in our families, in our individual persons, and that how we respond to vulnerability, how we are resilient against threats to ourselves, where we live, the stressors in our life, that is powerfully shaped by legal institutions, laws, politics, a complex intersection of different background rules, directly applicable rules, and then bureaucracies that manage and apply those rules. And I think in a nutshell, that's the frame that vulnerability theory asks us to think about questions of law reform with. That's the frame to look through, to not see problems in abortion provision as just a problem with people knowing about a right or deciding to exercise a right, but really woven into questions of where are people living? What are the socioeconomic determinants of their lives? What is the income inequality that structures their lives? So I think vulnerability is a lens that helps us see those questions, and particularly for reproduction, to think of it as so much broader. Reproducing institutions, reproducing families, to really push back against the impulse to say that questions as complicated as procreation and reproduction can be reduced down to just abortion or contraceptive use or mortality or morbidity rates. So I think it's a really nice way to address bigger questions of social justice. I think Leeds now, I think that the center and the center being established here is really a great moment to be on the ground floor, as it were, to see what the center is doing and what its mission is. I think Michael Thompson, a professor here, does extraordinary work. He also, as you know, does work in research in bioethics and in health, and I think as the center's director, he really is charting a fantastic course for people who are working in these fields and in related fields, people who are interested in vulnerability theory. It's terrific to work with Stu and always to work with Martha, who are very supportive. Martha has been an amazing support throughout my academic career. I can't say enough good things about Martha Feynman, because when you're a junior scholar, you look to senior scholars to help you develop your ideas, to define your ideas, and for support. And I've been to Emory, now I'm at Leeds, and in part that's because of the support I've received in this work from Martha and from Stu. So another reason to be here is we are planning some events in the spring that I think will be really interesting on resilience, on reproduction. So. I don't know if I will be able to answer all the questions that I have, but what I hope is that this particular project, this book project that I'm working on, the general theme of the book is, or the general point of the book is to map international reproductive rights as a human rights movement and how that's been translated to various countries as rights-based projects and as reform projects. And often when I talk about the influence of human rights in the reproductive rights movement, it is critical. And so I think one takeaway of my work is to be a little skeptical of what human rights can accomplish and do. And I'm not the first person to say that or to think that. But so one thing to take away is to challenge the reproductive rights movement, particularly in its U.S. moorings and its the U.S. leaders of international reproductive rights activism, to think about what reform policies they pursue and what are their unintended consequences. So in that sense, it's critical. I'm being critical, and I think that's okay. And the reason to be critical is to challenge in ways that Sam Moyn has done, Jana Halley's done, to challenge how are we thinking about questions of redistribution if we engage some strategies and not others. So in this vein, I've been very invested in writing publications on governance feminism and thinking critically about women's rights movements and what they contribute and what are the consequences of their reform strategies. But that can't be it. And one of the things that I'm working on and trying to accomplish with this book is it's not just critique. Critique doesn't get you very far. Critique doesn't keep you warm at night. So you also need, not a policy prescription. So I don't have answers, but you do have to engage then with what's after critique. So what's after human rights? What's instead of human rights? Can human rights be localized in different ways in the area of reproductive justice and reproductive health? And that's what I'm working on now. And that's why I'm very excited about some of the research I found and some of the conversations I'm having about custom and customary law and the application of different, these legal pluralist moments where various forms of authority intersect to shape people's lives and decisions. So one project is a conference that we are sponsoring through Emory. I am part of a research team based at the Emory School of Public Health, the Rowland School of Public Health. And with a team of public health professors, we have just received funding for a multi-year project that studies reproductive health among adolescent girls in the southeast of the United States, so Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia. And I think I'm the only lawyer on the team, but one thing so we're going to look at school-based sex education and healthcare delivery in schools for adolescent women, parental involvement laws, which are laws that require parents to give consent or notice before a teenager has an abortion, contraceptive use. So it's a really exciting project. And so when I was at Emory in February, one exciting thing that we did was bring together the public health school and bring together the Vulnerability and Human Condition Project and had a meeting to talk about where our approaches and interests intersected. So this event that will be at Emory, I think, will be a continuation of that conversation. My advice to people who want to become involved is it's remarkably easy to become involved if you are working in this area and you are someone who wants to contribute to conversations around vulnerability, resilience, social justice, redistribution. So my vices apply. I became connected to Emory through a workshop that Martha hosted several years ago. And the benefit of being part of this visiting community is being connected to like-minded scholars who read your work, respond to your work, who challenge you, who support you. So it's been a really a good experience.